By the summer of 1944, the roads of France trembled beneath the thunder of engines. Allied tanks, trucks, and jeeps rolled eastward in a wave that seemed unstoppable. But deep inside German headquarters, generals smiled grimly. They had seen this before. In their minds, the Americans were reckless, tactically aggressive, but logistically doomed. The Wehrmacht's analysts calculated the tonnage, the consumption, the range of Patton's tanks, and their numbers said one thing: the Americans will stop, not because of us, but because of fuel. To them, the Allies' momentum was an illusion, a flame that would burn itself out. But they underestimated one crucial truth. This war would not be won by tactics or bravery. It would be won by motion, by the ability to keep that motion alive. August 1944. The German front in France was collapsing. From Normandy, the Allies had burst through the hedgerows, racing across open countryside faster than any army in history. Patton's Third Army was the spearhead, tearing through villages, seizing bridges, and driving hundreds of miles in a matter of days. But speed came at a cost. Every tank, every jeep, every rifleman depended on a fragile lifeline: fuel, ammunition, food. Each Sherman burned almost 2 gallons of gasoline for every mile it advanced, and the farther Patton pushed, the thinner that lifeline became. German intelligence officers marked Patton's advance on their maps and waited. They had been soldiers long enough to know that no army could outrun its supply lines. To them, the math was destiny. "The Americans," one general noted, "are brave, but they are wasteful. They will stop. The land itself will stop them." But what they didn't see was the new kind of warfare being born, a war of movement, powered not by strategy, but by industry. By late August, the Allied advance had become a logistical nightmare. The ports of Normandy were still jammed with crates and fuel drums. Railroads were bombed out. Bridges were destroyed. Supplies piled up on the beaches faster than they could be moved inland. Meanwhile, the front lines had outrun every plan on paper. Tanks sat idle, waiting for fuel. Pilots landed near highways just to siphon gas from trucks. It was chaos. Something radical had to be done. And so, on August 25, 1944, American logistics officers launched one of the most ambitious operations in military history, a continuous highway of motion known as the Red Ball Express. The name came from a railroad term for priority freight. In the Army, it became the code name for a 24-hour supply route running from the beaches of Normandy all the way to the advancing front, more than 700 miles round trip. The operation would rely on trucks, thousands of them, driving day and night, loaded with everything from gasoline to grenades. No rail, no pause, no sleep. The route was marked with red circles on maps and roadside signs. Red Ball, the lifeline of the Allied push. There were 2 roads, one eastbound, one westbound. The eastern road carried supplies to the front. The western road carried empty trucks back for another load. Civilian traffic was banned. Convoys had absolute priority. Every 15 minutes, a new convoy departed, headlights blazing, engines roaring, wheels churning dust into the French sky. An army of motion was born. Of the 23,000 men who drove those trucks, nearly 3/4 were African-American soldiers, men who had enlisted to fight for a country that still denied them equality. Segregated, often underestimated, they were assigned to logistics, not combat. But in truth, they were about to carry the war itself on their shoulders. They drove GMC Jimmy trucks and Studebaker deuce-and-a-halfs, vehicles never meant for war's brutality. They ran 20-hour shifts with little sleep. They faced ambushes, Luftwaffe strafing, and roads cratered by retreating Germans. There were no maps, no reliable fuel stations, no rest stops. If a truck broke down, it was repaired on the spot or stripped for parts to keep others running. One driver later recalled, "The road didn't care who you were, it just wanted to break you. But we didn't stop. We couldn't." They painted slogans on their trucks: "Hitler's Nightmare," "Detroit to Berlin," "Hell on Wheels, Heaven Help You." At night, the horizon glowed with the red embers of their exhausts. They called it the Fire Road. The Red Ball Express became not only a logistical miracle, but a symbol of silent heroism. The men who weren't allowed to fight on the front lines were now keeping the entire front alive. The rules of the Red Ball Express were simple and terrifying. Rule 1, never stop. Rule 2, keep moving no matter what. Rule 3, if a truck breaks down, push it off the road and keep going. Convoys drove bumper to bumper, headlights blazing through the night. Military police manned intersections to wave them through red lights and towns. Every hour lost meant fuel tanks running dry at the front. If a driver fell asleep, another soldier would slap him awake. If a tire blew, they changed it under fire. And if enemy aircraft appeared, they scattered off-road, waited for silence, then rolled again. The trucks carried everything: fuel, rations, bullets, spare parts, even coffins. Each one weighed several tons, and the roads were narrow, muddy, and mined. Accidents were constant. Some trucks overturned. Others exploded under sniper fire. But the line never stopped. One officer called it a river of steel and courage. Another called it organized chaos with a pulse. Behind the roar of the engine stood another army, invisible but unstoppable. The factories of Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland were working around the clock. Every truck, every engine, every gallon of oil flowed from the American heartland straight into Europe's veins. A single Red Ball convoy consumed more fuel than an entire German division could obtain in a week. The Americans were burning gasoline to deliver gasoline, and it didn't matter because they could make more. When a truck broke down, mechanics could replace the entire engine in 45 minutes. When supplies ran low, new shipments crossed the Atlantic faster than the Germans could comprehend. This was industrial warfare, the kind Hitler never understood. He had tanks. America had factories. And factories, when mobilized, do not tire, they do not sleep, and they do not stop. The Red Ball Express wasn't just a convoy. It was the living, rolling proof that America's greatest weapon wasn't its soldiers or tanks, it was its capacity to move. German companies were used to silence at night. Silence meant concealment, survival. The Red Ball introduced a new variable, sound that refused to be hidden. Engines moaned past villages at all hours. Headlights tore the darkness. Soldiers who had once rested in relative calm now measured time in the distant drone of continuous convoys. We could hear them before dawn, a line of ghosts with iron hearts. It was as if the world itself marched. Unteroffizier, 116th Panzer Reconnaissance, reconstruction based on German field reports. The image of abundance, audible and visible, collided with the daily reality of scarcity. Where Wehrmacht supply dumps had dwindled to skeletons, the Red Ball's steady noise signaled that supplies were not intermittent but constant. This contradicted the German cognitive model. Economies at war ran on measured scarcity. The noise said otherwise. Reports rose to field headquarters. Reconnaissance observers described highways of headlights, columns stretching 12, even 20 kilometers. Where doctrine expected dispersion and concealment, the Americans displayed volume and audacity. High command began to translate sound into strategy and then into dread. They do not hide, they do not spare. They roll like a machine our guns cannot stop. Army Group B Field Report, paraphrase. Hearing trucks is not the same as seeing their cargo, but German troops connected the dots. Empty magazines at the front, the absence of resupply convoys for their own units, and the nightly roar of American logistics created a psychological asymmetry. The enemy seemed inexhaustible. Decisions at the tactical level changed. Commanders pulled back more readily. They avoided prolonged engagements, fearing they could not be resupplied if the battle lengthened. The sound carried beyond troops. Civilians heard the convoys and grew hopeful. Resistance movements swelled. Collaborationist morale frayed. The auditory footprint of American abundance quickly became a tool of soft power, an unintended propaganda campaign that no leaflet could match. Reading of a prisoner's short statement, "We knew then that we were outmatched, not by arms, but by an economy on wheels." So psychological was the effect that Allied and Axis units both tried to weaponize sound. German units later admitted to broadcasting engine noise to make their positions seem supplied. American troops sometimes heard phantom convoys in areas where no trucks ran, a testament to how deeply the sound had penetrated the imagination. The red ball did not merely move war materiel, it moved belief. The engines on the horizon were not just metal and fuel. They were a statement of an industrial society's capacity to sustain war. For many German soldiers, the meaning was clear. They were running out of what kept them fighting. That realization, slow, grinding, irreversible, was as deadly as any shell. If trucks were the arteries of the campaign, engineers were the surgeons. Where the path failed, they rebuilt it. Where bridges were gone, they invented spans that held tanks. German retreat had rendered the landscape hostile to transport. Culverts crushed, bridges demolished, approaches cratered. Engineers answered with speed, not design perfection. The objective was functional and immediate. Make a path, now, not a plan for later. A single truck disabled in a convoy could halt dozens. The solution was a doctrine of triage. Mobile maintenance units, fully equipped and on call, followed the route in rolling workshops. Their orders were ruthless. 15 minutes to fix or push it. If a repair exceeded the time, cannibalize it for parts. These men were not just grease monkeys, they were logistics artisans. Their speed turned loss into continuity. You cannot fix what you do not have. Engineers organized supply economies of spares, pre-positioned crates of engines, axles, tires, and seal kits. Each depot was a node in a circulatory system. Move the needed part forward, salvage what you can, and return the empties. Movement required discipline. Military police checkpoints enforced minimum speeds and removed stragglers. Alternate routes were carved when blockages occurred. The red ball became a dynamic traffic system. Reroutes, enforced gaps at choke points, and improvised lane repairs. It was logistics as live traffic engineering. The Wehrmacht's demolition teams thought they had bought time. American engineers had other plans. Bailey bridges, modular and portable, allowed units to span gaps in a fraction of conventional time. In one famous instance, what German engineers predicted would take 6 weeks to replace was built in 14 hours. When the first Sherman rolled across the temporary span, a cheer broke out. Engineers and drivers alike knew they had shaved weeks off the timetable. The red ball's lifeblood was fuel. Forward dumps were built every 20 to 30 miles to keep trucks from running dry. Tanker convoys ran alongside supply lines. Dedicated fuel trucks ensured that no vehicle waited more than minutes to refuel. The U.S. even ran pipeline efforts, Operation Pluto and other efforts elsewhere, and synchronized tanker convoys to create redundancy. When production could not immediately replace a broken component, improvisation did. Cannibalization of irreparable vehicles provided engines, axles, and springs. Blacksmiths and welding teams fabricated brackets and couplings from scrap. Creativity replaced paperwork. Improvisation replaced bureaucracy. Engineers were not just metalworkers. They were managers of human endurance. Crews were rotated. Mobile canteens followed the convoys. Medical tents stood by for exhaustion and frostbite. A system that ignored men would collapse. The engineers prevented that by planning rest nodes, hot meals, and quick medical triage. The cost was visible. By late September, thousands of trucks were deadlined, engines seized, tires shredded, but the flow never stopped. The lesson was simple. Sustainment at scale tolerates attrition. The engineers accepted loss as intrinsic to the model and built systems that replaced what was lost faster than the enemy could destroy it. Victory is often painted in cavalry charges and decisive battles, but sometimes it's drawn in grease, scaffolding, and midnight decisions to weld a flange or stitch a roadbed. The Red Ball Express owed as much to men with wrenches as to men with rifles. In the calculus of war, the engineers turned possibility into progress. Then came the rain and the mud. The Red Ball roads turned into rivers of sludge. Trucks slid off cliffs, got stuck for days, or froze solid under snow, and still they drove. They poured alcohol in radiators to keep engines from freezing. They lit fires under fuel tanks just to thaw them out. Some drivers tied ropes to trees to drag themselves forward inch by inch. Every convoy with a test of endurance, man versus machine, machine versus nature, and somehow the men always won. One driver recalled, "We didn't see ourselves as heroes. We just knew if we stopped, Patton stopped, and if Patton stopped, the whole war stopped. So they kept moving through fog, sleet, exhaustion, and fear, because the front never waited." By November 1944, the Red Ball Express had fulfilled its purpose. The Allies had broken through to the German border. New ports were open, railways repaired, fuel pipelines established. After 3 relentless months, the convoys finally slowed. Many trucks were junk by then. Engines dead, tires shredded, frames bent from the weight of war. But their mission was done. Europe's liberation had been fueled by their hands. In total, the Red Ball Express carried over 412,000 tons of supplies, consumed millions of gallons of fuel, and cost around $100 million. But it saved time, measured in months, and lives measured in thousands. The men went home to little fanfare. Most of the African American drivers were never decorated. Their names faded into archives and footnotes. But history would catch up. Decades later, their service would be recognized as the backbone of the Allied advance. The Red Ball Express was more than a supply route. It was the physical embodiment of an idea that freedom, once set in motion, cannot be stopped. It was proof that courage doesn't always charge into battle. Sometimes it drives through mud at 3 a.m., carrying fuel instead of bullets. Those convoys turned steel, oil, and sweat into victory. They showed the world that industry could defeat tyranny, that organization could crush ideology, that teamwork across color, rank, and race could win a world war. Patton once said, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks have got to have gas. The Red Ball Express made sure they did. In the end, it wasn't just a convoy. It was a symbol of endurance, of innovation, of unity. A moving monument of engines, courage, and willpower. For 82 days, they drove through hell. And because they did, the road to Berlin stayed open. They didn't fight with bullets. They fought with motion. And in doing so, they broke Hitler's war machine, one truckload at a time.